When we think of a sword, we think of the battles in which they are used. Battles wherein people upon people upon people are crushed together, hacking and slashing to whom they choose. And of course, the sword, the humble sword, is used for this hacking and slashing. It is arguably one of the most used weapons ever in history of warfare, and have been used on both man, beast, and of course in rare instances to activate other devastating weapons. Within a battle that can last for hours or even days, a sword is in continual motion, attacking both shield and armour. It is hacking, it is slashing, its blade is under constant strain. And yet, this raises a central question. Why were the blades of swords not completely destroyed after use in battle? What I mean by this is that think to any particular battle you have ever seen in movie, wherein swords are being used to hack and slash where they hit armour and shields. Now think to the end of that battle. Think to what the sword looks like. Yes, if you are looking at the sword right now, the sword will be completely intact. It will not be a stump. The blade will not be cut in half. Of course, there are rare instances in movies and media where the sword has been destroyed, but in most cases, 99% of the time, the sword looks just as new as it was before it was entered into battle. Sword warfare in real history and sword warfare in films have almost nothing in common. Particularly within films, sword warfare appears dramatic and allows the writer to match together certain characters, and most screen conflicts rapidly deteriorate into a chaotic furball of isolated encounters. In reality, conflicts were significantly more organised, with warriors rushing against one another, slashing with spears, not swords, and blocking all attacks with shields. It was obviously a terrible place to be, but far superior than a Hollywood brawl as long as your front line stays together. If this no longer holds true, your best bet was to abandon everything and run as fast as you could. Alongside this, movies paint the idea that you'd have no idea which people are your enemy and which are your buddies. Of course, in reality, it is near impossible to fight like this. So far we can notice a few important differences. 1. Within battle, you're not employing swords, but rather spears or spear-like weapons like halberds. 2. You're not attacking with weapons, you are instead striking people or their shields. And 3. It's also a far more psychological battle, aiming to convince the opposing side to flee rather than simply killing as many as possible. In reality, battle was not the purpose of swords, as swords were personal weapons used for defense, duels, and other purposes. Within Hollywood, heavy strong punches are used in movies to portray anger and strength, whereas broad sweeping blows are used to convey technique, concentration, and grace. These movements are also simple to execute. The trouble is that they are equally simple to imitate for your opponent. If your opponent knows what your weapon will do in the following action, they have to counteract that move, leaving you unable to react. Winding up for a tremendous attack simply offers your opponent a free pass to stab you in the face and kill you. Movies have also agreed upon the notion that a good sword is a heavy sword, and that the larger the weapon, the slower it is. But this heavy sword compensates with greater power, which is what you want to pound through your opponent's defenses. In reality, swords are significantly more agile than that, as are two-handed swords. So swords are unlikely to hammer and anvil one another, but rather dance around each other, quickly shifting and testing various angles until you have the opportunity to strike without getting hit in return. And thus, for most of history, swords were employed as either side weapons, primarily in conjunction with a shield, or as personal defense weapons. Until recently, spears were mostly used as primary warfare weapons. In ancient Greece, the spear was the primary weapon, and within the infamous Greek phalanx, every single soldier was armed with spears. Within ancient Rome, warriors used a shield and a sword together. The shield was employed for defense, and the sword was utilized for lunges. They also employed pilum javelins, which historians think were thrown, but others believe were also used as conventional spears. In the early Middle Ages, the lance was the primary weapon used in horse charges. Later times saw the introduction of new weapons like spears and halberds. Swords were more common as primary weapons in the later medieval times. Furthermore, swords were commonly employed as a personal defense weapon among the expanding city population. And in modern times, until the 19th century, the sword actually became one of the two primary weapons of cavalry. Hussars, a member of a class of light cavalry originating in Central Europe during the 15th and 16th centuries, for example, starting from the 18th century, were armed with sabres and pistols. And of course, outside of Europe, in other societies such as Japan, samurai mostly used spears and bows. The katana was primarily utilized in armored warfare as a personal defense weapon. And of course, while prolonged combat can cause nicks along the blade of a sword, there are a few things to keep in mind. 1. Most battlefield combatants used spears rather than swords because they gave a ranged advantage. 2. If you were going to fight with a sword, you were probably also going to bring a shield with you. It was quite uncommon for a soldier to bring simply a sword and no defense weapon. 3. Most sword-on-sword fights were quite brief, either because the swords are extremely dangerous or because many combats involved into wrestling contests that ended with one opponent bashing the other to death, utilizing the tang and pummel as a type of warhammer, or in rare instances simply using a dagger to stab them to death. 4. Within battle, the majority of strikes are not delivered at full power, particularly in unarmored combat. Typically, you will explore your opponent's defenses before committing to a full-fledged attack, and even then, it doesn't take much effort to truly damage someone. On the defensive side, a person would try to parry with as little power as possible. This is because it conserves your strength, and because controlling your opponent's blade is actually simpler when it remains in touch with or close to yours, rather than trying to toss it to the side. 5. Of course, to even significantly nick a sword blade, it must be struck very forcefully and at a highly unique angle. At a shallow angle, the blades will move along each other, perhaps shaving off some of the edge but leaving no nick. And even at the unique and optimum angle required, not every impact is forceful enough to damage the edge. In most circumstances, a blocked attack would include the attacking blade's edge colliding with the flat part of the parrying blade. In some circumstances, such as when the parrying combatant was caught off guard, edge-on-edge contact occurred, although European sword teachings taught to avoid it wherever possible. And of course, what if a sword collides with a shield? Well, because the point of contact is significantly longer in this situation, the blade edge will often roll rather than chip. So, it seems that the reason why swords don't get completely destroyed after battle is because they weren't really used that much. Other, more practical weapons were used in battle and, well, were largely more efficient than swords. This has been me, Jack, and, well, don't go die in a medieval battle, please.